So the biggest piece of advice I would give most SMEs, and I think it's probably the biggest opportunity out there, is find someone that you can trust, that you can work with, that you can listen to, that you believe in, and that they believe in you. So find someone outside of your business that can advise, can counsel you. You really need to have someone that's going to say to you, you need to do more of this and less of that. Your margins are rubbish. You need to put your prices up. You need to get rid of this customer, and you need to find some strategic alliances, and let's sell your business for 5x sales rather than 1x sales. I'm a big believer in you're investing in growth. Don't manage your costs. Your costs are what they are. They run the business, but you're driving of your sales growth, your opportunities that you're bringing in the marketplace. That's what it's all about. You need to be looking to grow. 20 to 30% a year would be satisfactory. I've got businesses growing 50% a year. So that means investing in marketing. That means investing in distribution. That means investing in potentially facilities, strategic partnerships, alliances. You need to be thinking further down the line. What we have a tendency to do in the UK, unfortunately, is to think small. Is to think the end of the week, the end of the month, the end of the year. That's a completely different mindset that I worked in the US, which is very much a think big. How do we tax this business? How do we go from $1 million a year to $100 million a year? How do we do that? And that's a mindset change that quite often UK-based businesses don't have.
Welcome to the Fractional Frontier, where we explore the future of leadership in today's evolving business landscape. I'm Charles McLachlan, here with Lorraine Carter, and every week we dive in deep into the world of high-performing fractional executives and the businesses that leverage them.
Whether you're an experienced fractional leader or a business decision maker seeking top-tier talent, this is the place to be for actionable insights, strategies, and stories from the front lines of fractional leadership.
Today, we're diving into the crucial topic of navigating economic uncertainty with seasoned fractional CFO, Rob Nicholls. So, Rob, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to becoming a fractional CFO?
It's nice to see you again, Charles and Lorraine, and thank you very much for the invitation. So I've been doing this about 5 years in the UK, and I did it for about 8 years in the US before returning to the UK in 2019. And really, when I came back to the UK, I made a conscious decision that I didn't, in my 50s, want to throw myself back into what I call the W-2 full-time employed for one employer. And I really wanted to work with multiple businesses and generally smaller businesses. A lot of my experience was with larger corporates. And so the UK is a very different market from the one that I was working in the US. And it's much more a relationship market. And so where I am in the Southwest, although I work with clients in London and Manchester, it's very much more relationship, who knows you, what people say about you when you're not in the room kind of thing around the fractional portfolio working. And it's taken time. It's taken 4 or 5 years for me to get a business that I'm really comfortable and really happy with. And really from the start, I was always very differentiating about the sort of clients I work with. And I think that's one of the key criteria we might want to touch on today.
Fascinating. And I know that the Southwest is very much like a small village, isn't it? It's a very tightly knit business community.
It is very much so. It's very much a community. It is a large physical geographical community. And I kind of ply my trade between kind of Bristol and Penzance. It's a large area, but with some fairly significant population and business centers in between. I have clients from Dorset to Bristol, from Exeter to Truro. But it is, everyone knows you, and you've got to be known by pretty much everyone. And that's one of the things I learned pretty quickly, is that you do need to be known, and you have to get out there and meet people and do networking and feel a little bit uncomfortable for a while. But really, I want people talking about me as much when I'm not in the room as when I am. And so I go to a lot of events, a lot of networking events, less today than I did 3 to 4 years ago. But it is very, very important to be known, liked, and in time, I think, trusted.
And those are all the classic aspects of any robust brand. So, Rob, you've worked with SMEs in a variety of challenging economic climates. What's the first thing you assess when stepping into a new role as a fractional CFO?
So I think regardless of the economic or business environment, and we're in a slightly strange period at the moment in the UK, and we're kind of in a slightly strange environment in the US as well. But the first thing I tend to do when I'm with a client or meeting with a client for the first or second time kind of thing is to really get a good sense of what the client wants to do, what they want to achieve, what sort of timeline they want to achieve it in, and what's important to them. Is it family? Is it friends? Is it golf? What is it that's important to them? And equally, one of the second or third things I will do is talk to either members of the board or and members of the management team to get a sense of what the issues are, what issues they're facing, whether it's a sales issue, whether it's a product, delivery, logistics, whatever the issues may be. And different, stakeholders will have different issues. I work with a lot of startups. I work with equally a number of scale ups, and the issues are very different. Some of them are funding and finance. Some of them are getting traction in the marketplace. Some of them are converting those sales. Some of them are long sales cycles. Some of them are supply chain issues. Every business is different and every environment is different. In the UK at the moment, we're in this kind of post-election, post-budget, end of the tax year kind of phase. And there's a lot of things that are being delayed and put off. In the US, equally, we're kind of in this no man's land, sort of lame duck period before a lot of business decisions will be put off till the second quarter of next year because investment decisions will be made on tax rates. We've got a little bit of clarity in the UK now of what tax rates and what the new government is going to do. Equally, a lot of businesses are still in the planning cycle. What does 2025 look like at the moment? And it's very murky. There's some certainty around tax and policy and what the government wants to achieve, but equally, we don't know how the consumer's going to act. We don't know where they're going to spend money. I work with several hospitality companies in the Southwest, and they've really struggled this year, not through what they've done, but through climate, weather, tax policy by the government. And there's been a lot of money that has not come into the hospitality segment this year. And they're going to have to make some pretty tough decisions in the next 3 to 6 months as to whether they keep staff on board, how they invest for next year, what sort of growth targets we set for next year as well. So it's a pretty tricky time at the moment. I wouldn't say it's any more difficult than it has been in the last 25, 30 years, but it is a pretty tricky time. And a lot of people in business today have not really been through a proper downturn or we've had a couple of mild recessions, but really in the last 10 to 15 years we haven't really had a real doozy of a recession or even a significant pullback. And I suspect in the next 3 to 5 years we might have one of those. Next year I suspect will be better than this year. 25 will be better than 24, and I suspect 26 will be better than 25. But equally, in the next 5 to 7 years, we probably will have a bit of a doozy of a recession, I suspect, and have to make decisions in that period.
Yeah, so you're talking very much about the situation as we are in the crossover between 24 and 25, but I suppose there's lots of themes that you've seen over and over again, and people that I talk to are saying volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity are just the way the world is. So what kinds of common mistakes do you see Rob, when people are faced with volatility and uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity?
So I think this is the new normal. I think we'll see a lot of businesses at the moment will start to hunker down. We'll look at costs first. We'll look at things like training budgets, marketing budgets, public relations, media costs. I think that's the wrong decision, to be honest. I'm always thinking 18 months to 36 months ahead. Where do we need to be? How do we need to position ourselves, the business, staffing, clients, distribution? Right now, an awful lot of businesses are thinking about how do we cut costs? How do we manage costs? How do we take out discretionary costs out of the business? How do we not backfill people who might leave over the next 30, 60, 90 days? And there'll be a fair amount of leavers in that period. Maybe we don't backfill them until we know better, maybe in the spring of next year. And so it's going to be a difficult time. I've got one client I work with. We've got 4 business streams within that business. One of those businesses really hasn't got the traction in the market, and we'd invested in it. We'd put 3 or 4 people in that business. One of the 3 directors, of which I'm one of them, was keen to kill that business because we couldn't see visibility of funding for that business. And here we are now about 18 months further on, and now there is a pot of money at the end of the road that the government has put there. And so by sticking with that business, we've got 6 people in that business today, we can really go after that funding. And there is a real pit of money, if you will, that we can go after that our clients will have. So the right decision there was to hold fast, keep the investment we had, not to cut back. And lo and behold, things are actually looking quite good. And that business probably will double over the next 18 months or so. So long-term thinking, I think, is perhaps more important right now.
And that sounds long-term thinking with some resilience as well. So that makes me reflect on how does the role of a fractional CFO differ from that of a full-time CFO when helping businesses navigate through those tough financial periods?
So to be honest, I think this is the new work style. To be honest, that's one of the reasons I embraced it. For obvious reasons, I can work with half a dozen businesses a month and charge them all a small amount of money. The cost of a CFO in my case is very significant for a business. If you want a full-time CFO, you're talking 6 figures. You're talking 150 to 250, depending on the size, the experience, knowledge, background, and insight that they've got. Whereas someone like myself or any fractional CFO or portfolio CFO can be brought into a business as an advisor at a significant cost saving for about the same money as you were paid for a 22-year-old digital marketing executive. You can have someone with 25, 30 years of experience, with connections, with knowledge, experience, insight that you just wouldn't be able to bring to the party. And so it's a very different ballgame. And you don't need that person 40 hours a week, 25 to 30 days a month. You just don't. So most of my clients are between 2 and 15 million pound turnover, and most all of them can work with 1, 2, or 3 days a month, maybe even 2 to 3 days a quarter in some cases, so long as the fractional CFO, in my case, is available to them on WhatsApp or on email or on Messenger, however it is, or LinkedIn messaging. I'm available to my clients pretty much 24/7. I have one client that calls me quite often, WhatsApps me at 10 o'clock on a Sunday evening after they put their kids to bed, just for a chat, just for can we have 5 minutes, Rob? What do you think? And so that's the sort of thing you're not going to get with a full-time employee CFO, and you're going to have 8 to 10 times the cost. So it's a much, much better way of working, in my opinion.
Well, I think that keys in really to what you were saying earlier about how you can become more resilient. And I read a lot of your LinkedIn posts, and you're constantly talking about margin. And fundamentally, a full-time CFO is just an overhead. They may be creating strategic value, but they're an overhead. So reducing that, as you say, by such a substantial margin is one of the steps to build up financial resilience, flexibility. But if we think about strategy more broadly, and you talked about thinking 18 months, 36 months rather than 3 to 6 months, what are the key steps you're recommending SMEs take to build financial resilience with all of this uncertainty?
So I think one of the first things I learned, and it's something that Elon Musk has mentioned recently, that you borrow money when you don't need it, because when you need it, the lenders will likely not be willing to lend it to you. So you do need to have a cash cushion. You do need to build up, a good bank balance. But what I always try to get my clients never to do is to manage the business based on their bank balance. You do need to look at your payment cycles. I'm a big believer in compressing the order to cash cycle. So if I bill you today, I want payment tomorrow. Equally, if I'm paying my suppliers this month, I need to be getting cash in from my clients at least as quickly, if not quicker, than I'm paying my suppliers. So you need to look at your what I call the order to cash cycle. You need to look at your terms of trade. If you're paying your suppliers on 30 days, but your clients aren't paying you for 30, 60, 90 days, you're gonna use up an awful lot of capital in receivables, in debt, and likely as not, you'll have an awful lot of money tied up in inventory as well. So you need to look at trying to go. I'm a big believer in asset light businesses that operate asset light, i.e., they don't tie up capital in plant, vehicles, however it is you get your product to market. You need to be agile and really looking at creating value through your people and minimizing the people, but maximizing the billing that each of those people have. And so you've got to be on top of these things. And that's really where a CFO is going to come in. I look at these things literally every other day for most of my clients, whether it's cash, bank, receivables, inventory, what the sales pipeline is, what the backlog is, because honestly, nobody else.
I'm intrigued that you mentioned the sales pipeline, because I know I've seen with lots of businesses I've worked with that it's very hard for the CEO to rely upon the promises of the person responsible for sales, and then converting those sales to orders and signed contracts that are billable. It's constant battle. What are your tips, tricks, tools that you've used to help clients achieve more predictable revenue streams?
So this is a good one. I work very closely with sales, marketing, the CEO, the C-level groups, and I basically find that finance brings it all together. So I am there questioning and challenging the sales and marketing function, as well as the CEO, because the CEO is often the primary salesperson out there talking to customers, talking to clients. And for me, it's about converting what I call sales opportunities into billable opportunities. So shortening the backlog. So I've got a client at the moment that we've been wrestling with a potential client sale since August, and we still don't have the order in hand, and we certainly aren't any closer to issuing an invoice. So for me, it's constantly looking at the pipeline, looking at the probability of conversion, what is the timeline, and who owns that relationship. Is it the sales manager? Is it as a business development person? Is it the COO? Is it the marketing director? Is it the CEO? Who owns that? So ownership, timeline, and constantly looking at, here we are, we're in the middle of the fourth quarter of 2025 now. We really should be. If you don't make your second month of the quarter, you're likely not going to make the quarter in terms of sales. So the less of a hole you dig yourself this month, the better off you're going to be next month. So it is a continual process of reviewing the backlog, reviewing who's responsible, what is the timeline, constantly working it. And that's where finance often plays the key role, because Sales will often promise, marketing will often promise. The reality is that finance will call a day when the sales are made, when the invoice is cut, then we can relax on it. But that's really where the finance person or the CFO is really driving that. And it's absolutely crucial. Your conversion cycle, if you're only converting a third of your opportunities into sales, you've got a problem. If you're converting 50 or 60% of your sales same month or the second month, you're probably going to be doing okay.
So that really sounds like, I guess, what we're all familiar with, but it's you really emphasizing that cash flow is often a major pain point, particularly with modestly resourced businesses. And what you're really talking it is through is some of the approaches you take to stabilize and optimize that for your clients. Is there anything else you'd add to that, Rob? Because you've given us a pretty good insight, which is a key challenge for most businesses, is just looking at that whole cash flow management scenario.
I think cash flow is critically important. It's not a silver bullet. It really isn't a silver bullet. It's important, but perhaps it's a little bit overstated as to the whole importance, because a lot of businesses, if they're not getting any sales or any traction in the marketplace, you can have the best cash conversion cycle and the best payment terms. You're not bringing business in, you're going to struggle mightily. Equally, if you don't have good gross margins, my key KPI, if you will, that I focus on literally every day with every client, it's your gross margins. You can look at sales conversions, sales growth, profitability, but your gross margin, the difference between the sales line and your gross profit, your gross margin that you're making on every sale, if you're less than 30%, you've got opportunities to scale your business and increase your gross margin. You've got between 30 and 40% gross margins on a recurring basis, month in, month out, quarter in, quarter out. You've got an opportunity to grow. But most all of my businesses, I want them to get to a 50% minimum gross margin and more likely moving towards 60% over time. That's the key critical criteria that I will often use. Be that as it may, we've got to maintain cash and cash conversion cycles and bringing new client opportunities into the pipeline. But your gross margin on a continual basis is the key KPI that I will always measure a business on. And equally, when you get to be a larger business, that'll be a key valuation metric. If you're looking to sell or do a transaction, any buyer will look at your recurring gross margins. And if they're, 15 to 20% gross margins, you're going to get X as a price. If you've got 30 to 40, 50 to 60% gross margin, you're going to get 2 or 3X the pricing. So it really is a driver of value creation. That's gross margin. And that's really what I can kind of focus on continually, is managing down costs as best I can and scaling up the revenue line as best we can. And there are 5 or 6 levers that you can use for that you probably both know well and your listeners know well. The key one for me is always pricing.
So really what you're sharing is about striking that balance between cost management, how to navigate through uncertainty, and striking that balance between cutting costs and also then investing in growth.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in you're investing in growth. Don't manage your costs. Your costs are what they are. They run the business. You need people, you need facilities, you need expenses, but you're driving of your sales growth, your opportunities that you're bringing in the marketplace. That's what it's all about. That is the key criteria. You need to be looking to grow 20 to 30% a year would be satisfactory. I've got businesses growing 50% a year. And yes, they've got to manage their costs and look at costs, but you need to be investing for where the business is going to be 2 to 3 years from now. So that means investing in marketing. That means investing in distribution. That means investing in potentially facilities, strategic partnerships, alliances. You need to be thinking further down the line. And that's where a CFO is really going to focus. I'm not really interested in what the financials were 12 months ago or what our profitability was in July or August this year, I'm really looking at what are our gross margins to be in the second and third and fourth quarter next year, and how do we get to that?
So you started to talk about some of the key things that you measure, and the key things you watch out for. Uh, what about the other kinds of things that you're watching for? You've talked mostly about financial measures, but are there other key things that you're watching out for in a business, with your role as a trusted advisor to the CEO?
I think one of the things that most businesses do not do particularly well are things like partnerships and strategic alliances with third parties. I don't think many businesses can scale on their own, just finding organic customers and new growth through existing channels. So I'm a big believer in finding ways to leverage off other businesses, whether they're smaller or larger. I've got a deal with one of my clients with a large insurer, such that if my client sells a system to one of their end clients, they will generate potentially a 10% discount with a large insurer that effectively can offset the cost of the installation of my client's equipment. So it's a win-win situation. And I don't think this is something we do particularly well in the UK. We don't partner particularly well. We don't leverage other distribution networks. It's very common in places like the US for a small business, an SMB as they're referred to there, to look at large companies and figure out, how do we work with them? How do we leverage what they do, and how do we get them to sell our product? We don't do that very well here in the UK. We tend to just think our channel, our clients, this is what we've always done. We sell through these channels or these distributors. So I think a big opportunity for a lot of SMEs are partnerships, whether they're government entities, private entities, public, CICs, community interest companies, whatever they are. You need to partner. You cannot do it alone. And that's one of the key roles that I play as CFO, whether that's bridging opportunities, bringing collaborations, bringing connections oftentimes as well. I will often bring new legal partners into a business, new banking partners into a business, new accountancy partners into a business, because I know that's the way they'll scale better than where they were. So I think that's as much as cash flow is very, very important and it will make or break an awful lot of businesses, equally the ability to partner and build alliances outside of your existing industry or even region. I think a lot more businesses could do a lot more and a lot better were they to do that.
I would really agree with partnerships, and it's very interesting that you put so much emphasis on it, Rob, because it's actually something I encourage clients to do from a brand alignment, brand strategy growth point of view, for all the reasons you've advocated. So it's very interesting to hear it as much from the financial perspective as it is from a brand strategy perspective. So perhaps in the context of that, because I'm guessing then, and that would be my experience of working with clients in the US as well, there's a big influence around cultural differences, but I didn't realize it was that even having worked with clients in the UK, I didn't realize it was that level of reserve around partnering and collaborating to drive growth.
Yes, it was a surprise to me, to be honest. I worked for more than 2 decades in the US, and it's just a way of working. It's a mindset. And when I came back to the UK, having worked in the UK, going on 25 years ago, it was something that was missing, and it was quite obvious. I mean, as a portfolio executive, I have to go out there and meet people all the time and network continuously, whether it's on digital, on LinkedIn, or in person at drinks events, whatever it is. You've got to get out there and meet people. And more often than not, every time I go out and meet people, there are people wanting to collaborate with me, to engage with me. Either it's events or talks or just partnering with people. I had coffee last week with someone, a brand strategist, who is desperately keen to partner with me. And I'm like, I'm not sure if there's an ability to go in together and work together, but she was absolutely adamant that there's an opportunity there. And I think we need to do much more of it. And this collaboration, you often can't do it alone. And the multiplier effect, the flywheel effect is so powerful. And I think as portfolio executives, we think we know it all. We think we can do it all. You can't. You need people to work with. I work with banking partners, legal partners, marketing partners, brand strategists, all manner of different people. And it makes for a richer environment. And I get an awful lot more inbound inquiries as a result of that as well.
I think there is another aspect of this, which is that people are often very naive about how to build a partnership. They don't recognize that you have to be very intentional about understanding the benefits to both parties, how the collaboration is going to move forward. And I've been in too many meetings where people have these lofty ideas about the wonderful things we could do together, and then they go away and you don't ever hear from them again. And it's that crucial first step, I think, that too often is missing.
It is difficult. It is difficult, I will admit.
Well, in that context then, can you share some success stories where you helped an SME overcome significant challenges, or where you've brought them to that point where building a partnership like that has been a real game changer for the business?
So I work with a client at the moment who actually initially I did a little bit of pro bono work for going on 3 years ago now. And I went in, then they were really struggling mightily. They weren't financially savvy people, super nice people, very creative, but their business was rocky. They had too many people, too much cost, too much inventory, and their payment cycles were awful in that they were paying suppliers before they got paid by their client. They had too much of their business wrapped up with one client. They had about 50% of their business was coming from one client, and that one client was basically wagging the dog. And so I went in, did some pro bono work for them for a couple of weeks. And basically, I wouldn't say we saved the business, but we saved the business from itself in many ways. We had to take some headcount out. We had to reposition the company. We had to put some marketing dollars out there. We had to renegotiate the contract with the primary, the largest customer. We had to get a new line of credit initially to get through it. And about 6 months later, actually more like 9 months later, they came back to me and said, Rob, would you come on board with us as a board advisor, as a paid board advisor? And so, of course, I said yes. I knew the business. I knew them. I liked them. I trusted them. I believed in the business. They liked me. They clearly trusted me because they invited me back. And the business, to be honest, here we are nearly 3 years, nearly 3 years later, and the business is probably double the revenue, about the same headcount because they scaled back by about 50%, but then have brought back new people into the business. They've just won the King's Award for International Development. They've been on several international business trips. 99% of their business is overseas sales. And the opportunity is within, 3 years, likely as not, we will do a transaction that will hopefully, in my view at least, will be a game changer for the directors, both financially and for their business, and will set them up for the future. They're both relatively young individuals with families, and so it'll be a game changer. They couldn't do it without me, but equally, I have to have them as the vehicle and the business to do the transaction with them. And that really was a difficult situation, just under 3 years ago, to where they are today, really firing on all cylinders.
So that's a great example of a high pressure financial situation. And I suppose question that many of the people listening to this will want to know is, what are the key lessons you've learned from those kinds of high pressure financial situations?
So I think you need to have an advisor. You need to have someone as a sounding board. You really, really need either a board advisor or a non-executive director or someone who can look in with an independent view and perspective and is not in the weeds every day. It's really, really difficult for someone who's involved in the business 7 days a week to understand what the bigger market opportunity, the market environment is, the economic environment, what the opportunity for sale or a merger or whatever that opportunity is. It's really difficult. So I think the key thing is to find someone that you believe in, that you trust, that you can have a conversation with on a Sunday night at 10 o'clock or a Monday morning at 9 o'clock, whatever it is, that they will have your back, they will advise you, they will counsel you, they've got the experience, knowledge, and perspective that maybe you as an individual don't have. And so I think that's one of the first things I would strongly advise people to have. There are other things you need to have. You need to have strong banking relationships and banking partners. I think you need to have an ability to ask someone to find you finance, to help you with funding and finance. And that oftentimes will be someone like myself as a CFO or board advisor. I think, as we've mentioned, you really need to have partnerships with other organizations that will see you through and oftentimes give you additional business beyond your bread and butter business. So we'll introduce opportunities and clients to you. And the other thing I would say is there's two things. Think longer term. Think, where do I want to be 3 to 5 years from now? How do I get there? Well, you'll get there with partnerships, with people advising you. But equally, the thing I tend to focus on now a lot with my startups is think big. What we have a tendency to do in the UK, unfortunately, is to think small, is to think the end of the week, the end of the month, the end of the year. That's a completely different mindset that I worked in the US, which is very much a think big. How do we 10x this business? How do we go from $1 million a year to $100 million a year? How do we do that? Not how do we pay the VAT bill this month and how do we hang on to this one client that we've got? So I'm constantly talking to the startups I work with is think big. Think the BHAG. What are we trying to achieve here? And what's the timeline? Is it 5, 12, 15 years? How can we create something out of this $1 million business that we've got and make it $150 to $250 million business? And that's a mindset change that quite often UK-based businesses don't have. But that's one of the reasons we don't have any billion-dollar businesses, or very few, in the UK, whereas in the US, there's about 1,500 of them. It's just a different mindset and a different way of thinking that I think SMEs in the UK would be well advised to do. And they need people like myself or yourselves who think longer term, who think bigger, who think what is the opportunity here and how do we go after it? And how do we fund it and finance it? How do we make it happen?
That's a massive difference in terms of cultural reference point, but you're not the first person that I've heard say that. And I've even heard startup founders that I've worked with myself talk about that, accessing funding and thinking bigger in the US is seismically different to the Irish or the UK markets, albeit Ireland is even smaller jurisdiction, but the frustrations of that. But yes, it definitely sounds like a colossal difference in terms of mindset. What's the first step for an SME with insufficient financial planning experience? How do they prepare for increased uncertainty or challenges that are potentially coming down the road economically? Where would you, why, because you've shared a lot of insights and valuable tips here, Rob, but what would you say would be the starting point for somebody who's really struggling and doesn't have that level of sophistication?
So I think if you're a relatively small business under £1 million turnover, as long as you've got a bookkeeper in place and you're getting some what we call MI, some management information, you need someone to help you interpret that. So you need someone who's going to take those financial numbers and put them into a narrative that you or your directors or your co-founders can understand. So you need someone, maybe not necessarily to hold your hand, but to explain these are the implications of what you're doing, of the lack of sales or the margin or the costs you've got in the business. You really need to get a handle on the numbers. And that basically runs to, you need a good bookkeeper who's giving you numbers pretty quickly. So, we're running toward the end of the month here. I would suggest by the end of the first week of the month following, you need to have some numbers to say, what were your sales? What were your margins? What were your costs? And you need to understand at the same time is what is your sales pipeline looking like? So you need to have a very good handle on your numbers. I think that probably is one of the number one things that most SMEs don't have is a good handle on their numbers. But equally, they often don't have a good handle on where their sales for the next month or the next quarter are coming from. So you need to have visibility. You need to be talking to your business development reps or your sales managers or your CMO, whoever it is, and knowing what is the likelihood that you're going to make X dollars in sales next month? What is the probability? And what do we need to do if we're not going to make it? If by the second or third week, we're significantly below where we need to be, what are we going to do? So you really need to have a good handle on your numbers. But equally, I think as a small business leader, you need to have someone that you can talk to outside of the business. And that generally isn't the partner at home. That should be a non-executive director, someone, a consigliere, if you will, or a board advisor, whomever it is, someone that you can bounce off. This is the problem we've got. We've got a problem with lack of sales or more sales that we can deal with. We don't make any money on those sales. What do we need to do? That's when you need a board advisor, and you don't need a full-time CFO, but you might need one day a month where I come in and talk to you and sit down and review the financials and go through what is the plan, what is the strategic plan that we've put in place, what do we need to do to affect an improvement in the future, because that's what it's all about. It's all about the future months and quarters.
So you were talking about what you could offer and what businesses lack. There's a question here from someone saying, so what is the tipping point at which it really makes sense to have a fractional CFO? CFO sounds like a really big job title. If I'm the CEO of a smaller business, what are the indicators that I need somebody like you?
So a lot of startups think they need a CFO even before they have revenue. That's not the case. And I would caution that you do not need a CFO until you've got a several £100,000 of recurring revenue. So I wouldn't say there's an absolute dollar or pound figure that you need to have attached to it. You need to know where your business is. And if you don't know where your business is financially or strategically, you need to have someone in the business or looking over or holding your hand or sitting alongside you, however you want to phrase it, that'll tell you, you need to be doing more of this and less of that. And if I were you, I'd spend some money there and not there. And there isn't an absolute revenue or profitability number that you need to look at. I would suggest if you've got more than 8 to 10 people on board in a business, you probably need to have someone who's giving you financial oversight and financial management. And maybe from a corporate governance perspective, you need to have someone to use as a sounding board. I will often say you need, first and foremost, you need a bookkeeper in place. And quite often, most of my clients will have either a head of finance or a finance controller in place, at least someone who can provide the numbers or the management information for myself and the board or the CEO or the managing director to be able to interpret. So don't go CFO full-time when you've got £500,000 worth of revenue, but certainly consider if you're £500,000 to £1 million, considering a fractional CFO is a very smart move, or a board advisor, someone who can counsel you, hold your hand, can talk with you with a bank or a legal advisor, talk to clients. I will often go and see clients with my own clients. I will be in the room with them when they meet with people. I will often be in the room when they're looking to build new partnerships and strategic alliances. I'm often the person who will play point on any negotiations, whether it be an M&A, a merger, an acquisition, or a divestiture. I will often play point on that as well. But don't start too soon. You know, a CFO can be, even a fractional one. I'm not cheap, but the value that I will bring is probably 20 to 50x what my expense will be. And I think I mentioned earlier, you know, the cost of a full-time CFO is significant, but you can get a fractional or portfolio CFO for less than it would cost you for a digital marketing assistant full-time.
So as we're talking now, many people are thinking about 2025, but also what's 2026, 2027 going to look like? How do you think SMEs should prepare for the financial challenges over the next few years, beyond the next quarter?
So I would tune out an awful lot of what I call the noise, whether it's politics or whatever else that might be going on. Tune that out and look long term. Look at where you want to be with your business in 5 or 10 years' time. And how do you get to that point? You know, if you're turning over £1 million today, how do you turn over 2 million in 2 years' time and 5 million, within 3 to 5 years? How do we do that? What do we need to do? So think long term, invest for the long term. So that might be people, it might be plant, it might be strategic alliances, whatever it is, think longer term and think big and make sure you've got the funding and finance in place to do that. So whether that's a bank line, a startup loan, whatever it might be, a loan from the British Business Bank, there is funding and finance available out there. There's private equity money, there's venture capital money, there's angel investor money. There is capital out there. People just don't really know how to access it. They don't know where to go. They don't know how to present themselves. They don't know how to put a pitch deck together. So I do a lot of work with my clients, particularly the startups and the scale ups, around pitching to investors, how to kind of encapsulate what we need to grow from 1 million to 5 million, the investment that's needed, how are you going to spend that money? And most oftentimes investors, banks will want to see a CFO alongside the CEO. They don't generally want to see the sales director or any other director, if there is anyone. They want to see what the CFO looks like and talks like and how he presents the numbers and convinces them that they are good custodians of their investment. So making sure you've got funding and finance to scale, and you can't do it organically quite often because you can't generate enough margin and profitability to keep reinvesting, to bringing additional people on board. So you will need capital, and that capital will often be from an outside source.
And listening to you, Rob, I think it's a really important point that some of our listeners may not appreciate, but it becomes obvious from how you've described how you're working with your clients is I think it would be fair to say that when you're working as a fractional executive, as you are, regardless of whether you're CMO or CFO, it's a much more of a hands-on involvement rather than just a pure advisory role, because you are very much rolling up your sleeves and getting involved in a very tangible and sometimes operational capacity within your clients' businesses, which a typical advisor in the broader consultant or advisory sense wouldn't actually do. So I'm just emphasizing the point because you've been talking about that, but some of our listeners may not appreciate that very significant difference between somebody who's dipping in a lighter way as an advisor versus what you've described, what you're doing.
And it's difficult when you're a fractional portfolio CFO, CMO, whatever it is, you're only there for a small period of time, 1, 2, 3 days a month. And so you've got to make a big impact. But my objective always as a CFO is to become a trusted advisor. I want the CEO or the managing director or the board advisor, whoever it is, to really trust me. I want to be the go-to person that they really trust. They want Rob's opinion on something. And most all of my clients, that is the case. But that takes time. That takes, in some cases, years to build up that level of engagement. I know what schools the CEO's kids go to. I know what ages they are, what sports they play. I want to know, I want to be involved in helping them because I want to know where they want to go, where they want to take the business and what their timeline is. If they've got young kids, I know they've got 20 years in the business. If they've got kids in their 20s, well, they may be looking to exit in the next 5 to 8 years. So it helps to understand what their objectives are if you know them better. And that comes through trust and it comes through building a relationship, and it takes time. And quite often, sometimes it might never happen, in which case maybe that's not the sort of client you want. I really want clients that trust me, that I really believe in, and I believe in their business and I like them as people. And sometimes it's just not the case. It just doesn't work. And as a fractional CFO, sometimes you have clients that maybe don't pay you or don't value you or don't involve you in decision making. I had a family client down in Dorset who basically didn't involve me in decision making. After about 3 months, I realized very quickly that they were making decisions without me. And I was like, well, you don't need me. If you're going to make these decisions anyway, it's a pointless endeavor spending a couple of grand a month on me. You don't need me. So we separated. That wasn't a good client for me. And you have to find those clients you're comfortable with and build that level of trust and engagement with. And, sometimes it doesn't work and sometimes it does take a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you could give SMEs who are really thinking about accessing the kind of expertise that you could really make a difference in their businesses, what's one piece of advice you might give them to enable them to thrive in any economic environment, particularly one that might be a little bit more uncertain?
So the biggest piece of advice I would give most SMEs, and I think it's probably the biggest opportunity out there, is find someone that you can trust, that you can work with, that you can listen to, that you believe in, and that they believe in you. So find someone outside of your business that can advise, can counsel you. I put a post out a couple of days ago about there used to be a role in the community that did that. It was called bank manager. Well, they don't really exist anymore. And so what happens is people like me fill that void. And so you really need to have someone that's going to say to you, you need to do more of this and less of that. And that I think is probably the biggest opportunity for most SMEs, whether you're turning over £1 million or 15 million. You need someone to say, do more of this and less of that. And your margins are rubbish. You need to put your prices up. You need to get rid of this customer and you need to find some strategic alliances and let's sell your business for 5x sales rather than 1x sales. So find that advisor, find that trusted consigliere, if you will, whether that's the CFO or a board advisor, someone who's not necessarily in the weeds every day for you. I think that's really, really key.
Thank you for all the different things you brought us today, Rob. And it's been really good for me to hear the range of things you do for clients, because although you and I have been talking for several years, I didn't appreciate how you get involved in some very interesting situations. So where can our listeners find out more about your work and discover you if they want to engage with you?
So the best way is always on LinkedIn. I'm on it a lot. So message me on LinkedIn, Rob Nicholls. I'm quite happy to talk to people, have a call, have a chat. I do a lot of work just advising people. I think one of the most important things you can do as an advisor, as a portfolio or fractional executive, is just to help people. And if you help people over time, you'll become known as someone who people can approach and that they value your advice. So LinkedIn is the place for me.
Thank you so much, Rob. Well, for those of you who are listening today and perhaps discovering the value of working with a fractional executive, don't forget to follow the Fractional Frontier for more episodes like this. And if you found today's conversation valuable, then you're very welcome to share it with your network. And make sure to follow us on LinkedIn for more exclusive content and catch the edited version on all major platforms. And don't forget to subscribe. And if you enjoyed today's discussion, then leave us a review or even share the episode with your network.
Thanks for exploring the fractional frontier with us, where leadership knows no boundaries.